All right, what's splashin'? Welcome to season 5, episode 6 of Siren Sundays with me, your host, Lashanti the Siren. This show is focused on speaking with researchers, scientists, and practitioners of environmental science and all things conservation. You are now tuning in for our conservation conversation, and today's guest is Bradley Watson, a very familiar phrase. How are you, Bradley?
I'm okay. It's great to be here.
I know you're
Thank you for
super
having me.
late there. I know the time difference is huge, and we had the same issue last week with Amina. Big 5 hour difference. But so glad that you can join us on your lovely Sunday evening. Yeah, we have some hellos from the crowd, some faithful viewers. Hello, everyone. And let's just
Hello.
dive right in. You can start off with introducing yourself again. I know people have seen you on the show before, but feel free to do it again. Let us know who you are and what do you do.
My name is Bradley Watson. I am an environmental scientist who's now going into sustainable development, and so it's a fairly new field. I My undergrad work was in biology. My first master's degree was in plant ecology, and in that work, I actually focused on ecosystem services pretty strongly. And so, for everybody to understand, an ecosystem service is, how humans view the benefits or the value of a natural system. So when we think about mangroves, we think about protection from storm damage, we think about carbon storage, we think about nurseries for fish. In my master's degree, I was in the Midwest of the US. And so we were thinking about, how much productivity you can get out of a grassland and how much carbon we would store in the soils of that grassland, depending on how you manage it. And so that was where my thinking I kind of was able to frame questions about biology from a human perspective, which is very much what sustainable development is geared towards, at least presently it is. And so I applied for a Chevening scholarship through the UK government and was awarded this scholarship to study here for a year at St. Andrews University in Scotland. And it's really given me a chance to kind of put together these ideas about how human systems and ecological systems or natural systems work together. And what's interesting is that now that I'm able to focus on sustainable development directly, you're noticing the changes in the dialogue. And so now we're thinking about, beyond ecosystem services, what is the value of nature? What really is nature? One of the interesting concepts of sustainable development right now is thinking that there are not really many natural systems left. You think about the influence that humans have on the environment and the fact that we're now in the quote unquote Anthropocene. So,
Mm-hmm.
the Anthropocene is the period of time where humans have had the greatest impact on the environment compared to all other species. And so there's some ideas that the Anthropocene began the minute we began agriculture. And that was when we began influencing the environment. And so that's what I do now, and I'm looking forward to figuring out how to integrate some of these thoughts about how to develop a sustainable economy, a sustainable society, focused on the environment, especially in light of the universe's recognition of the value of the environment, especially just coming out of COP26. Somehow these discussions have been kind of siloed previously, but at present time the entire community on the face of our planet is recognizing the value of this work. So that's what I'm doing now. And I'm looking forward to getting home and putting some feet on the ground.
Awesome. And I am definitely hearing that I am having some technical difficulties on my end, which is super unfortunate. Apparently, my screen is black. I don't know if you can see me, Bradley.
No, I'm sorry, I can't.
Oh, okay. So, what I'm going to do is keep the ball rolling. So, when I ask you your next question, I'm going to hop off and hop back on. But if you can just, you said you're at St. Andrews right now studying. What did you say your master's is in?
Sustainable development.
Right. So you also mentioned going to COP26. Do you have any takeaways from that? Like anything personal or things that you think would be good for your life or just for the Bahamas in general? But before you do that, explain what COP26 is for our viewers.
Okay, okay. So COP26, the meeting of the Conference of Parties of the UN, it happens on an annual basis. The bigger ones are every 5 years. And so you would hear about the Kyoto Protocol or the Rio meeting or the Paris Agreement. And these are all meetings of the Conference of Parties of the UN. And so, the most recent really big one was the Paris Agreement. And in that agreement, there were a lot of statements made or ideas that were formalized through um, a document that all of the parties signed and ratified, right? And so you have this Paris Agreement. One of the key points in there is Article 6. It talks about compensation for carbon emissions. In addition, out of the COP meetings, we have this idea of an NDC, a nationally determined contribution. And the last big thing that was discussed at COP26 was the Warsaw Convention on Loss and Damage. And
Mm.
so we could go into this and talk more about what those things are, because my key takeaway from COP26 was that we really need to make the Bahamas a part of this conversation. And the only way to do that is to empower as many young Bahamians as possible to enter these rooms, because COP26 was a massive meeting, and it was very easy for you to lose yourself in what's happening around you if you don't really understand how can you apply pressure in the right places to advance the goals that are right. So how do you represent the Bahamas in this global arena where there's all these other entities that are vying for their say? And the only way to do that is through education of our population. And so, coming out of COP26, going in actually, Rochelle Newbold, the director of Department of Environmental Planning and Protection at the time,
Mhm.
she gave me the mandate that my job was to get together some Caribbean youth and understand what the situation was and develop this regional conference that we're going to host in Nassau in July. And so this is an
Yes.
ongoing thing that we've been working on. And that's the thing about COPs. We've had young Bahamians like Charles Hamilton, like Taran Sims, like Nikita Shield Roll, who've attended these events and have been representing us on the world stage. And so now it's a continuation. And so it really has to be a strong core group of Bahamian environmentalists, but not just environmentalists, social scientists. For example, I was on the bus, it's a shuttle going into COP, and I saw a face that seemed very familiar. And I went and sat down next to her, and it was Alicia Wallace. And I was like, we went to
Oh,
Kingsway together. I'm
yeah.
friends with your little brother. Um,
Yeah.
and now you're here. What are you doing? And she was there representing for women's rights, and she was actually presenting at a panel that day. And so it's really important that we give our youth a place to stand on, some foundation, and then
Mhm.
also facilitate their flight. We don't know what they're going to do after they leave this country. What was interesting was that there were some countries that had enlisted um, consultants to represent them. But the
Yeah.
Bahamas, we actually had enough skill, in my opinion. You have Adele Thomas, you have Shanique Aubrey, you have our own prime minister who came in. And so,
We had you.
and you had myself as well, yes. So whereas, you could have a country that is not able to really represent itself and articulate itself in these spaces, we are almost there, but we have to keep this going. And so, for example, one of my big challenges was understanding how policy documents work and reading them and understanding what are the outgrowths that are going to come from this. What is this setting us up for the next year? So
Mhm.
COP26 is where, and in addition, oftentimes these negotiations happen beforehand and you walk in the room and things have already been set in place. And so you're thinking about the big players making these commitments to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. And those are the things that set us up for selling carbon credits, for example, because I can elaborate on that in a second, but you have to think about this is where the top level decisions are made, and then you need to have people who are aware of these changes and are literate of this policy, so that we can now determine our way forward and navigate through these policies to achieve the best outcome for the Bahamas possible, and then also as a region. Because the other cool thing about COP is that as small island developing states, we operate as a block through
Hmm.
this group called AOSIS. And so AOSIS is it's a group of small island developing states. This year it was headed by Antigua and Barbuda, and they represent our opinions in these spaces. So when Dr. Thomas or Director Newbold or Charles had information to add into this policy document about this agreement on loss and damages, it was all funneled through AOSIS. And through this block is how we articulate our perspectives. And what's important is that we must recognize as the Bahamas that we have friends in this fight. And our voice is much louder if we speak in a chorus, if we speak together.
Hmm.
And so the other thing is that we need to have payments professionals integrated into all of these systems so that we can move this thing forward as quickly as possible because we are really running out of time. I'll give one more anecdote about COP. There was a meeting of youth from small island developing states called, and a representative of the UN was there to head the meeting and give us some advice.
Hmm.
And walking into the meeting, luckily, I had been called into this meeting because I had made connections with other Caribbean youth who said, Bradley, this is happening. Let's go here.
Hmm.
So it's extremely important for us to develop our networks around this region. And
Yes.
this individual said, we introduced the idea of 1.5 to stay alive, years ago, maybe 8 years ago. And we've been fighting for them to recognize 1.5 to stay alive all this time.
And can you
It's
explain what
terrible.
that is? I know what it is, and I always chuckle when I hear it. But can you say, what is that 1.5 to 1.25 to stay alive?
1.5 to stay alive is saying, yeah, exactly. It's saying that, if global warming exceeds 1.5 degrees Celsius, the Bahamas and other small island developing states and coastal regions around the world will not be able to live the way we live.
Hmm.
Um, and you're thinking about fisheries resources, you're thinking about hurricanes, you're thinking about, what's another crazy one that's aware that I became aware of?
Which one?
We're going to need to change our labor laws eventually if climate change continues at the pace it does, because people are working outside under weather conditions that are much different
Mm.
than what our labor laws were made under. So you need to
Listen,
change
that heat
the
is
time
real.
people work. Think about, when do you take breaks?
Yeah.
These are considerations not just for the Bahamas, but for places like Kuwait, places where their temperature fluctuations are more extreme. But it's
Hmm.
all coming downstream. There's a multitude of things that climate change are going to affect. And if we don't educate Bahamian professionals to be aware of this, we will be receiving information as opposed to creating information. And we have the potential to create information and set standards for the future because we feel this pain the most. And so
Yes.
that's why we really need to lean into having representation there. So in this meeting, hearing this gentleman say 1.5 to stay alive was something that they've been fighting for years,
Hmm.
it made me feel more comfortable with the situation because in my mind, 1.5 to stay alive is, I shouldn't say this out loud, but we're very close to 1.5. It's very difficult for us to actually make 1.5 to stay alive work. And
Yeah.
so we have to fight. And it's like, if we don't start fighting for the next win now, we won't have a win in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
You know, we have to figure out how to do this. We have to figure out how to make our voices heard and present these opinions in these spaces. And it's in the manner that they are properly received. There's a
Yeah.
protocol for how these discussions work. There's a
Hmm.
way for you to make things happen, and you have to learn that. And so, what amazed me was that there were individuals, young people. I think he was 33 years old. He told me this was his seventh COP. And I was blown away. I was like, so that's why you understand the system so well.
Yeah.
And so it's crazy for us to expect ourselves to be able to compete when we're at the disadvantage of inexperience, right? And
Yeah.
so that's why I'm so excited. We're having a conference in July,
Hmm.
make these issues known to the young Bahamians who are able to invest their careers in this sort of work. Because it's
Yeah.
not going to be one COP, it's not going to be two COPs, it's going to be the next 20 years of advocating and researching and finding ways for us to live the lives that we deserve to live.
That's true. And, in a lot of my episodes, the topic of climate change, of course, is a very popular one. It's a very important one, and it's almost one of those things where, and I love that lately I've been referencing the movie Don't Look Up, but climate change professionals, scientists, conservationists, we've kind of been, we've been shouting for so long, and I think what we've been doing wrong.
I just needed to clean my screen, my thing, because I was fuzzy. It was supposed to be very smooth.
You were fine. I'm so Always a good time with Bradley Watson. But right, so one of the things that we've been not doing well is communicating this information, because the information only makes sense to us, right, to each other. And I think lately we've been starting to find ways to appeal to the public, to appeal to the people who don't understand. Like as simple as that 1.5 to stay alive. I knew what you meant, but a lot of people have no idea what that means. Or even like when you say that 1.5 degrees on a, we do Fahrenheit in the Bahamas, which I really think we should get on this Celsius train, but 1.5 degrees Celsius does not seem like a lot because it just sounds like such a small increment. But on a global scale, on a climate scale, it's huge. It is huge for us. And we think that we have so much time, but time is only passing and it's only getting worse. And as you said, the Bahamas is a country that is affected so much by this and not a major contributor to the problem. We really need to be the one sounding the alarm for this, and making sure that other countries understand, like, hey, we're here, we're people, we're being affected, and you guys need to chill out.
You know what freaked me out today?
What?
I was cooking some food and I listened to the
Right?
podcast, right? And I just plug in like This American Life, check out, not doing anything related to work. And they started talking about climate change. And I was like, no way, there's nowhere to
Mhm.
hide. So they talking about this area in California that was on the coastline. And this lady was sleeping at night. And when she woke up, she looked out her window. Her house was on a cliff, right? But it had maybe about 30 feet between the edge of the cliff and like her home, right? And this was an area that was zoned and she was allowed to live here and all of that. And when she
Mhm.
woke up, her backyard was gone. She had to go further into her house and look out of the window at her home and could she see that the edge of her home was literally hanging. There was no earth beneath it.
Oh my
And it was
gosh.
because as sea levels rise, what they had planned for erosion, what sort of erosion they expected to happen, because sea levels are rising and because there's more wave action and stronger storms and El Nino effects, the cliff was moving. And so her whole neighborhood was now threatened with this thing, what they call it, a managed retreat, right? And so they have to now, over a period of maybe 50 years, figure out how do we, number one, find the money to pay for these people's homes because you don't want to take somebody's property away from them. That's a
Yeah.
lifetime investment. Where does that person go to live, and what do you do with the home? How do you get rid of? Do you just let the house fall in the ocean?
I was
So,
just gonna say.
and so I'm just it made me realize, this is around the world. This is,
Mhm.
and if we are not paying attention, the the ways to cope with this are going to move ahead of us. We're going to lose the headway. So when you think about countries that are at the forefront of adaptation to climate change, you think about, or at least using international mechanisms to adapt to climate change.
Mhm.
Um, the point of today is supposed to talk about the blue economy, right?
Yeah.
So
we always we always do that, but that's okay. 'Cause I do have a
I'll try
comment
to
before we
give
move
a
on
little
about that story.
a quick
That's
talk about
okay.
the blue economy, so you can like
Yeah.
have that, because we're talking about globally what's happening with sustainable development and what's happening with adaptation to climate change through the economy. And so I like to look at other instances so we can figure out what the state of the art is, what's the next thing to do, and then figure out how do we apply that to home using the information we have from home, because our
Mhm.
situation is always going to be different. So
Right, but not so different, right? Because like I said, I wanted to touch on that cliff story you just said. People, we seem like, oh, we're low lying islands. People have done like the earth scans. If you move all the water, we're also sitting on a cliff. So who's to say we won't erode so much that your little house with your beach front, all of a sudden your back, I don't want to say your back front, what am I talking about? Your back of your house is now in the water out of nowhere. You'll wake up one day and you will literally think that you had like a 10 mile spread of beach, and now all of a sudden the beach is right at your back door, because this is how serious some of this erosion might just be for us. Geologists, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is my
and
comparison.
even
Bring it home.
and it also makes me think about information, right? So um why wasn't this something that the municipal planners were aware of? Was it
Hmm.
because they didn't have the funding to go out and do a survey, or they didn't really lean into their understanding of climate change?
They
But
might have
that could
not
have been
thought
a
they had
life
that. They
loss.
had more time. They probably thought
And
they
we
had more
think we
time.
so it yeah, it's all of this. And some of the really important work that's happening at home right now is invested in adapting our healthcare systems to climate change. And I'm meeting more and more Bahamian professionals who are really leaning into that work, and it amazes me some of the things that we should consider, because we only think about hurricanes, but what are the other challenges?
Hmm.
You have Charles Hamilton, you have William Hamilton, Dr. William Hamilton mentioned, how we really need to consider the volcano eruptions the other day that impacted Barbados. The volcano did not erupt in Barbados, but they had to deal
Hmm.
with the smog. They had to deal with the concerns about air quality. So you really need, we have to open our minds completely, and every individual should be considering climate change in their work.
All right.
So blue economy, maybe, or no?
So we have two questions, and then yes, we're going to dive right into blue economy.
Okay.
These questions come from my wonderful Aunt Denise. Does the 1.5 gauge as a goal fluctuate in winter or summer seasons? Good
We're
question.
talking on average. We're talking about average temperatures, right? And Um, some places are expected to feel these temperature increases more than other places. But when I think about 1.5, what I really think about is how much energy that must be, right? So that 1.5 is generated by carbon dioxide molecules in our atmosphere that are absorbing extra uh, energy from the sun and holding that energy, because there's more carbon dioxide in our atmosphere than there was before. So previously, we'd have the sun hitting the atmosphere, heating up these carbon dioxide molecules, and then they get excited and they shake, and then they radiate energy, and that energy is
Mm.
radiated back to the earth, right? And that is the greenhouse effect. That is the difference between Earth and Mercury, or Earth and Mars. It's why our planet is able to sustain us, why we could live here. Because otherwise, if there was no carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, no atmosphere, the Earth would be too cold for us to live on. So we need the greenhouse effect. It's been there all this time. But what we've
Mm-hmm.
done is we've added so much carbon dioxide as well as methane to and other gases. In addition, water is also a greenhouse gas, and there's like the snowball going down the hill, collecting all of this energy. So you're thinking about that 1.5, but you're thinking about how much energy does it take to raise the temperature of the whole Earth by 1.5 degrees Celsius, and that
Every
energy is
year.
stored in this extra carbon dioxide and methane in the atmosphere that's just shaking and holding this energy and then radiating it back. So how do we cool that? 1.5 degrees heating the
Drop a big ice
entire Earth.
cube into the water.
Pardon me.
Yeah. Drop a big ice cube into the water. I think that was on The Simpsons. I think they're always onto something. Right?
Well, and that's the other thing. So, when we talk about this blue economy, I'm going to touch on some other points, because we have to be at the very cutting edge of technology in the Bahamas if we want to really make the most of our future.
Hmm.
And so the other thing that is really in discussion in the public mind right now is direct air capture. So,
Direct what?
um, direct air capture.
Air capture. Okay.
Mhm. So let's go through the blue economy, and then we'll segue
Yes.
into carbon credits and the carbon cycle and how the Bahamas is involved in that, and then we'll go on to the next steps, the next
I
way
love this.
for us
This
to
is
move
your
forward.
show. Go for it.
I just
Ready.
wanted to say, this is what I was prepared to say.
There you go. What is the blue economy?
Blue economy.
Seemed unprepared.
Please don't make it any worse. I'm challenged. It's the fact. It's a fact.
I know it's
Um,
late there, guys. Forgive him. He is on the other side of the world. He's across the pond. There's a 5 hour time difference. He's an old man. It's way past his
oh
bedtime.
man.
Yeah,
Uh,
no grays, but he's old.
no, that's because this camera is my friend. So so
So,
blue
what is the
economy,
blue
right?
economy? Yes.
The Bahamas. Think about this. We've had a blue economy the whole time. Our economy has been blue all this time, because it's about the marine economy. It's about, we get our livelihoods from sun, sand, and sea, whether it's tourists or it's fisheries, and then our other industry is finance, which is ironic when you start thinking about how finance plays into this blue economy.
Right.
So if we go all the way back, they argue that humans were an aquatic species and that we were always along coastlines making our living off of the ocean. Now we have a Bahamian economy that uh, is rooted in this coastal zone, and we need to figure out how to make it more sustainable, more environmentally friendly, and more socially friendly, right? So sustainable development, we think about people, we think about planet, we think about productivity, right? So the people
I
we're
like that.
serving
The
as the
three P's.
Bahamians. Pardon me.
three P's: people, planet,
Hmm.
productivity. You got something
Hmm.
going there.
Don't give me the credit for that one. That one, that's definitely the UN.
Okay.
um,
Oh, okay.
but of
So
but it's
excited.
important because you're thinking about this blue economy, people, planet, productivity,
Hmm.
and it used to be investments in shipping vessels would be a
Hmm.
way to invest in the blue economy, and that's workable, right?
Yeah.
But you had the Seychelles come out with this blue bond that they did, and they did this blue bond through what's called a debt for nature swap, right? So the Seychelles are a group of islands very similar to the Bahamas in that their economy is really based on, the
Hmm.
coastline, tourism, and fisheries.
Yes.
And
One of
you
my
know,
go-to places. I want to travel there one day.
one day, one
Hmm.
day, and so you have these islands, and under the strain of debt, right? So this international debt that a lot of these small island developing states, we all carry this debt, and one way to compensate for that debt was to do a debt for nature swap, right? And
Okay.
so a debt for nature swap is one of the more established ways that you get financing for these sustainability initiatives. And so you would take an area, you would promise that you were going to use it for conservation, and in exchange, an international funding agency like the IMF or the World Bank or um, the Nature Conservancy also participates in these debt for nature swaps and facilitates a lot of them.
Okay.
They have a lot of capital that they're able to lean in with, right? So the Seychelles did this blue bond. They raised $15 million, and usually when a country offers a bond, it's a guaranteed investment. So you're there's a country that's a sovereign nation, and depending on their credit rating, you're guaranteed to get this funding back. Whereas a stock, you're looking for more of a return. A bond is more like, we sticking around inflation, we're going to get you these funds. And with an impact investment like this blue bond, impact investing is when you are now investing with a purpose. It's not just about making a profit; it's about making a change. And
Hmm.
so you had, I think, 5 million came from TNC, the Nature Conservancy. 5 million came from, I think, the World Bank or the IMF, and then they raised 5 million in the capital markets, right? In the
Hmm.
private markets, right? So people were
Okay.
able to invest in this blue bond, do something good with their money, and
Right.
have a guaranteed return. Partially because you already have 10 million of the bond was already sold out by these reliable companies. Now,
Hmm.
what the Seychelles did with that money was they put it into this trust fund, and this trust fund was now managed, and the funds were given out to companies that were developing industry in the blue economy. So, you know, sustainable fisheries, and work like that, sustainable tourism. But there was also funds allocated for social programs within the blue economy. So,
Right.
looking at improving education for the children of these fishers, right? And so this is a really cool way that they put together this program to access capital from outside of the country to facilitate development within country.
Hmm.
So that's one way that you can get this startup funding to make your blue economy more sustainable. Then there was this paper that came out, and after COP, I was reading this paper, and I was writing an assignment for school, and I was just like, man, this paper is written for the Bahamas. Like, who wrote this? I hadn't looked at the author before I read it. And I look at the author and I'm just like, oh no, it's Adele Thomas. Like, of course it's written for the Bahamas. Of course she's doing the work for the people. So
I
this
gotta get
paper
her on my show, man. I hear so many great things about her.
should be quality. So this paper, she's talking about debt for climate now, right? So
Okay.
debt for nature, because there's a lot of problems with debt for nature swaps. And when you think about this, there's this idea of conservation being a very colonial activity, right? You leave that piece of land alone, because we value the nature potentially more than your livelihood, which is very contentious. And in conservation, we face that issue often. And that's why we've learned so much that we have to do our stakeholder interviews. We have to really, it has to be grassroots conservation.
Yes.
And so, yeah. And there was this paper talking about, a debt for nature swap that happened. I think it's on a lake in Africa. I think it might have been Tanzania, and they had mangroves, and they did a debt for nature swap. And in this swap, they agreed the country got this financing, right? And in exchange, they said that they would stop people from harvesting wood from this mangrove swamp. Oh, pardon me. Whoa, no, 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 this mangrove forest, right? And so
I'm at harvesting wood. Like, whoa.
they were harvesting wood apparently in this mangrove forest. So if you go back into deep history, right? Even before the colonizers came into that area, they used these mangroves poles to pole their boats, and they
Wow.
would sell these poles up and down the delta. Like they would export poles to pole boats.
Wow.
That was their export from this area, and they made their livelihood from it. And they've been doing it sustainably, well, potentially sustainably, but they've been doing it for so long that the system that they were looking at this system saying this is nature and we must conserve nature. It wasn't natural. That system had been managed and used by this group of people long before anybody had observed it and recorded
Yeah.
it. And so now you say we're going to do a debt for nature swap and we're going to, stop people from using this area, not really understanding the history, not taking all these things into account. And
Mm-hmm.
so this idea is what they call the commodification of nature, or like making nature a commodity that you can sell.
Mm-hmm.
And the big problem that we have with commodities in so many instances when we think about sustainable development is that we don't factor in what that commodity actually costs. Gasoline, nobody's calculating how much the carbon dioxide emitted from that gasoline should cost. So when you go to the pump and you buy that gas, you're not paying for the carbon emitted. Somebody else is going to pay for that in their lifestyle, in their lived experience, like us, right?
And they're
So
hurricanes.
it's the same thing with these debt for nature swaps. And so I'm gonna stop the monologue pretty soon. Just gonna talk about the debt for climate, and then we can move back to blue economy, and you can ask me questions so I can not take over your show.
Yeah, man, it's your show. It's your episode.
um, so debt for climate was very interesting when Dr. Thomas proposed this, because it's tagging on to this idea of loss and damages, right? So really want these larger countries, the developed nations who, had an industry that emitted the carbon before we got a chance to get to the table and emit carbon and benefit from that. And now
Right.
we recognize the bad parts, and we're trying to really avoid emitting carbon. And so it's really about them making payments to kind of compensate for the challenges that we face. In another paper, there was this talk, because there's this other factor that really leans into this all, and that's really going to influence how we develop our blue economy, and
Mm-hmm.
it's debt from COVID. COVID, not just in the Bahamas, but in many small island developing states, has increased national debt levels because people were trying to compensate for people trying to compensate. Appreciate you, Mallory. Compensate for losses to tourism, right? So much money
Mm-hmm.
was coming in from tourism. Now you have this borrowing to supplement these balance sheets. And what is that going to cause people to do? Are we going to now sell land and start another hotel? Is that going to make us more likely to, you know, compromise our environment? Is it going to make us more, and us being all small island developing states, is it
Right.
going to make us more prone to accepting ideas about oil exploration in our waters? What is this debt now gonna?
Mm-hmm.
How is that gonna influence us? Because you think about these restructuring programs that the IMF does, right? And you lose some of your sovereignty, you lose the ability to determine your course, um, because you now have it's been assessed. You're not able to pay off your debt. We're coming here. You have to pay this debt off because we're an international community, and that's how finance works.
It
And
works.
so
Yeah.
you're gonna have to make some changes. This paper was proposing that we ask China to forgive some debt because they hold so much sovereign debt around the world. They have the power to literally say, "Oof, what if you were to just conserve this mangrove reef? I mean, this mangrove ecosystem as well as this offshore reef. And if you conserve that, we'll forgive your debt." And that takes the fisherman who is going to use that reef completely out of the conversation, right?
Yeah.
So these are the nuances of these conversations that we have to really be aware of, and we have to engage in this dialogue from the jump for
Mm-hmm.
us to achieve the best outcome we can achieve.
Yeah.
And so that's really, those thoughts are about funding for this blue economy. So you can sell carbon credits, which is a great opportunity for us. You can appeal for debt for nature swaps, debt for climate swaps, um, and then you can use those funds, because here's the kicker. I believe Bahamian national debt is on the order of billions of dollars, whereas,
Probably.
yeah, and I mean like tens of billions of dollars. I mean significant funds. And when you compare that to what we could gain, I think Barbara Bernard was quoted in the Tribune, in the Guardian 2 weeks ago, that our carbon credit industry could be worth about $375 million. Now I haven't investigated how she came to that number,
Right.
but that's the number that's out there. And you compare that 357 million, $75 million to the billions of dollars of debt we have. We have to look at our climate financing and our carbon credit sales as seed money in our blue
Mhm.
economy, as ways for us to expand this economy and expand it in two fashions: one that's environmentally friendly, one that's socially responsible.
I love
So yeah, so that's what I'm seeing happening right now, and I
it. Mhm.
think that that's the way that things need to move.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And and again, following along our conversation discussion points that we agreed on, with the carbon credits, I've actually had people approach me knowing that, obviously I'm a marine biologist, I work in conservation. They're like, hey, can you tell us a bit more about carbon credits? And I'm just there like, I don't I don't know. Why are you asking me this? But it's really becoming this buzzword around the world. And lately, as you said, like it was in the paper about 2 weeks ago in the Bahamas. And so it's really interesting to see the shift in people's mindsets. Like you have people who were not really interested in conservation, not interested in the environment, now tapping into this carbon credits thing and getting excited about it. So can you tell some of our viewers and me, because I really still don't have a full grasp of what it is, but what exactly are carbon credits and how could the average Bahamian maybe utilize them?
And the last part of your question is the key one, and that's the key part
It's
of
the
it, right?
social, yeah.
So this is the situation that we're in. Um, Carbon credits. Where is this carbon? Is one question, right? So this
Mm-hmm.
carbon is stored in the soils or in the sediment of your mangrove ecosystems and your seagrass ecosystems.
Mm-hmm.
There's less carbon stored in our terrestrial systems in the Bahamas because our soils don't develop that deep layer of thick black material. They call that humus, that organic matter. That would be where you store carbon on land or you store it in the trees. And so we don't
Right.
have as many, like the Amazon rainforest, for example, stores a ton of carbon in the live biomass. In the
Yeah.
Bahamas, a lot of our vegetation is more stunted because a lot of our vegetation has been cut down before and had to grow back, or our mangroves deal with very harsh conditions and they don't grow to be these huge forests like you have in India or elsewhere, right? And so a lot of the research on carbon credits was done in those places, and now we're applying these thoughts to the Bahamas. But in the Bahamas, our carbon is stored in the soil, and the carbon credits are valuable because we are trying to get the entire world to net zero, right? We're trying to get net zero is the idea that
Mm-hmm.
we are no longer adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Um, the way to get to net zero is to reduce the amount of carbon you emit, and then for the big emitters to invest in carbon capture. And
Yes.
this carbon capture is typically done through natural systems. In the Bahamas, the two systems that are most likely to capture carbon would be mangrove systems and your
Mm-hmm.
seagrass systems. Mangrove systems, the ideas around carbon capture through them are more developed, and the processes for reforesting mangroves are more developed in the Bahamas, as opposed to thinking about seagrass beds.
And
So,
Bahamians scared of seagrass. They're like, "What's that dark patch?" I'm like, "It's the beautiful seagrass. Like you're gonna learn to love this." But I digress.
I'll digress for a second too. At COP, I met this student from University of Edinburgh who's working on technology to automate planting seagrasses. So you'd have a robot that goes out and collects the seagrass, and then I think you also have another robot that goes out and plants it. And so, these are the things, these are the next generation technologies we need to invest in because you're trying to figure out how do you generate this carbon credit at a low enough cost that you actually make a profit, right?
Right.
Um, so if we go into this just to continue the
Mm-hmm.
whole net zero idea, we're committed. The world is trying to get to net zero and we're trying to limit our carbon emissions. And so countries will put out an NDC, a nationally determined contribution. And so this is, we are going to reduce our carbon emissions by X amount this year.
Mm-hmm.
And so to meet that, suppose they have a manufacturer who emitted more carbon than they were supposed to, right?
Mm-hmm.
That manufacturer can say, for example, come to the Bahamas and pay and say, well, when you plant out a mangrove ecosystem, you plant out an acre, you store X amount of carbon. It's usually measured in tons, right?
Mm-hmm.
I will pay you to do that if I can claim that I caused that to happen, right? And so I will reduce my carbon emissions that I report by however many carbon tons of carbon I can pay for you to
Yeah.
remove from the atmosphere. And so
And would
that's how
that be
these carbon credits
annually
work.
though?
Pardon me?
Is that something that is going to be done on an annual basis? Because I feel like a lot of people think that, oh, I'm just going to have this mangrove in my backyard, right? And I let people pay me for this mangrove storing carbon. And it's almost kind of one of those things where when you even think of just planting mangrove seedlings, they're not doing anything yet, right? But people are paying to have them planted in the hopes that this is going to count towards it. Because I have a very love-hate relationship with this whole offsets concept. Did my master's thesis on it. I'm a little iffy on it. So I always hate the idea of people thinking that it's better, at least when it comes to this, right? Oh, it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. No, like don't emit the carbon in the first place. But we're obviously too far gone. And I don't want to sound like one of those, I don't want to sound like I'm taking a side. This is not advocacy here. This is all informational people. But I do have a particular sort of feeling towards this whole carbon offsets idea, which is similar to what Bradley's kind of talking about. So I'm gonna let you keep going. And then,
No, it's key because
mhm.
the offset thing. It's why would you encourage somebody to continue to emit, right? And
Oh yeah,
you
keep doing what you're doing. We're gonna just keep planting mangroves here, and then now, because and see, this is gonna go into conservation colonialism. Now the countries that are underdeveloped are forced to stay underdeveloped because they're paying us to keep planting mangroves and keep not developing our country so that we can keep making these conservation areas that are benefiting the world, but it's stifling the country and the growth of what this country could be doing because another country is too selfish. So let me
not
step
only
off my
that,
soapbox.
no, it's real. It is real, real because
Real talks.
don't,
Real talks.
don't make me do it. Don't make me do it. It's real because I was all right. So just a digression. I was on the train one night, and they have a lot of fossil fuel, wells, oil wells, up north in Scotland. And this guy sat across from me, and I didn't know him from Adam, and we had a discussion. And I tell him I study sustainable development, and he changes his way he's sitting for a little bit, and I go, oh, you know about fossil fuel? I mean, you know about sustainable development, and you have an opinion. So he goes on to tell me he's an engineer, and they engineer all of the wells that they dig up there. And he's like, but the thing is, what we can do is direct air capture, and we'll capture this carbon dioxide, and then we'll push it right back down into the earth, and then we'll cap that well off, and then that'll be that. And I was just like, huh.
Oh, like a bomb.
And you believe this? And what's scary is that there are not just individuals, but entire industries that are invested in that idea, and the idea has not been proven yet, right? So you
They'll do
have,
anything to chase what will make sense to fit with what they want to do. So, because even the
meanwhile,
term
in the
sustainable
U.S.,
development, no, that's okay. And not to hate on anyone who studies this or is called a sustainable developer, but I thought it was so interesting that one of the lectures that we had in our course back in my master's said sustainable development is an oxymoron. There is no way to develop sustainably because either way, you are damaging the ecosystems. You're damaging whatever habitat you choose to develop on. So all you can say is less least amount of damage possible. It's nothing sustainable about development, which is sad to hear, right? And I mean, because we all think it's such a great buzzword, but sustainable development is an oxymoron. I said it.
it really is.
Don't attack me, people.
It really.
And
And
that's
the
what you're
thing is,
studying.
like,
But I'm happy because you are very conscious and you're very environmentally focused. So that's great.
oh, and I question life every day. Like, like I question, like, what are we doing here? Why? Where are we going? In class, we were talking about what are these companies doing? These life cycle analysis. Saying how much carbon are we using to make a pair of shoes, right? And Adidas or whichever company is making shoes out of recycled goods, right? Recycled materials.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about it, we have enough shoes. Like, we don't actually need more shoes.
Never
Like, what? Oh man, the people who watch the show are good people.
I
FYI.
know. Stacey's
Um.
actually going to be on my next episode. So
Oh
excited.
wow.
Yeah.
Oh, thank God I went first. um, I'm
We do have
yeah.
two questions, just to segue a bit. I know my aunt Denise asked which country is leading the way in reducing carbon emissions, which is actually a very interesting question because we all know who's making the most. Like,
That's a good question,
mhm.
especially since just the other day we were talking about carbon footprints. I don't have a name for the country that's the lowest emissions, right? But apparently Greenland has some of the lowest carbon emissions per capita, right? So you would analyze somebody's lifestyle in Greenland, and the way that you have a person, or to reduce your per capita emissions, it has to do with public transportation. It has to do with how do you heat a house, how do
Mm-hmm.
you produce energy. So all of these things are not necessarily. It's very difficult for an individual to make enough decisions to reduce their carbon consumption on their own.
To
It has
impact.
to be a collective move. So in Greenland, apparently they're able to their social systems allow them to have very small carbon footprint. But then I had to stop them in that class. I had to say, hey, how does Greenland make their money? How do they fund their
Economy.
infrastructure so that they could have this super green lifestyle?
How
They
do
sell
they?
oil. That's an oil country. Greenland, I believe, is the country
Get
that has like
out.
one of the most substantial sovereign wealth funds. The money that they earn from oil, they invested in this trust fund, and it's available for the country's development. You know, so how are we accounting for this? What does it mean to live a
Wow.
green lifestyle? Well, everybody using a different measuring stick. We ain't agree on no measuring stick yet. So,
Greenland ain't even that green. I hear they look like Iceland. Like they have the wrong name.
and they
That's so
run up, and
interesting. I
then
never
what
thought
was
about that.
crazy, back in 2012, I was in undergrad, and my roommate did a study abroad in Amsterdam, right, for Dutch Shell, and they had to do a presentation on how he would develop oil fields as the ice retreats. Literally, a presentation on how to capitalize on the ice fields with the
Melting.
ice retreating, so you could dig and drill more oil. So there's intelligent people invest in time, energy, and money to figure out how to continue going
Take
the same
advantage.
direction we're in. And
Yeah.
so the only way to counteract that is to do the same in other directions.
Ooh,
And so this
interesting.
whole concept about carbon credits and debt for climate, and all of the work we do is to support that push, because we have to, we're like a startup business trying to bootstrap our way to success, while these other well-funded entities are doing their best to maintain the status quo. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. So we do have a question, or is this more of a comment from Mallory? Okay, so is debt relief later usable for putting funds towards management and enforcement of protected areas or restoration of mangroves, wetlands, and coral reefs? Interesting.
So I would say that it depends on the way that this is structured. So
Mm,
um, it depends on us. We Everything that we have happening around us, we should be really riding bicycles.
mm,
Everything that happens around us depends on what we do.
hmm.
And so I think that there is a way for us to make that happen. It depends on individuals being a part of the conversation and working towards that. But I would argue that that is how we should structure this. And to continue on that thought, we need to find ways to involve Bahamians in this economy at all levels. We need to
Yeah.
have our finance gurus. So we have many, I mean, brilliant minds who work in finance in the Bahamas who could be marketing these investments for us. They're voluntary investments that people can make. I There was somebody talking about a sustainable clothing brand where you sell a piece of clothing and the person pays an extra bit of money to offset the carbon that was used to produce the clothing, and that money is used to fund planting of mangroves. But it could also be used to fund the monitoring of these mangrove areas. And then
Yeah.
you ask yourself, who is going to do that monitoring? Well, it should be Bahamians.
Yeah.
There
I
should
was
be
gonna
a
say it should be
class
the people on the
at
ground.
BTVI on environmental monitoring. And this is an idea I got from a colleague of mine, Nikita Shield Roll. You know,
Nice.
um,
She's got a lot of great ideas, boy.
psh, you know,
Mm-hmm.
these are
Yeah,
the
tap
ways that
into
we're
her.
gonna. Pardon me.
Yeah, tap into her. I keep trying to get her on the show.
It's all about us. It's all about everybody doing their
Mhm.
part and recognizing
Yeah.
people for their strengths and moving it forward. Yeah.
Hmm.
So these are the ways that this is one boat that we all on, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's doing something different. You have an investor coming in from Dubai, and they have some funds that they store in the Bahamas. Why not convince them to allocate 5% of their investment for the year into a vehicle that's not necessarily going to produce huge returns. It's going to produce you a little truck along return, but at the same time, it is making the fisheries industry in the Bahamas more sustainable. So you could feel better about when you fly down here and you burn all that CO2 to come here to manage your investments.
Your
Why
private
not?
jet. Hmm.
But it's an
Yeah,
ecosystem.
invest into this protected area management. It's we have a lot of protected areas coming on stream. We need a lot of money to manage them effectively. So
Effectively. and it has to be something where we invest for a later return. So when we invest in our environment, we need to think about, what is the best way for us to spend those funds. If we create an individual who can go out and do this monitoring work, and now they get to remain in their community, right? And they get to invest in their community, and now you have, support for other industry that's happening in that area. Uh,
Mm,
it's we can't just keep letting nature slip away and become the playground of people who have free time.
yeah.
We have to integrate ourselves into these systems where we have Bahamian livelihoods that depend on these systems, and that causes them to fight for these systems and support those systems. And so we think about the blue economy and conservation. We have to we have to make it all one thing. We have to figure
Yeah.
out how to get your second homeowner and your, fifth generation resident to see things not the same way, but very similarly, and to fight for
To
this
work
goal
together.
together.
Yeah. And that's what I think is so interesting about just even the title of this episode, right? The blue economy and conservation. We have to be very, very conservation and sustainability minded as we try out these new things and as we start incorporating the literal environment and our natural resources in all of these other great ideas that we're having to make our country more stable and to help our country grow and become more sustainably developed.
And what are we trying to sustain? I mean, are
Our
we trying to
livelihood.
sustain, like, who can do John Canoe if ain't no jobs here? Who can do John Canoe if ain't nobody? If your house was washed away and you prefer to go and move to Florida as opposed to living here in
Sure.
Nassau, who's
Iguanas
gonna?
move.
Pardon me?
Iguanas move. They rising. It is that's the only island that's on the fault that's actually rising, and
Huh.
where everyone else is going to probably sink. I know I heard that. Anyone listening who knows what I'm talking about, please validate what I just said. I'm pretty sure I was told, the way that, that plate, the continental plate,
Hmm.
Mayaguana is near the fault. And as sea level happens and just over the years, Mayaguana is the only island that seems to be kind of rising, over time. So we should all be trying to get some property on Mayaguana. Tell them Mayaguanian, what are they called? Mayaguana Islanders. We coming.
Go with it. You could say the locals. No, don't say it.
The Out
Oh,
Islanders. I was called an Out Islander when I was visiting Grand Bahama, and I really felt away. I know. I was like, y'all just call me an Out Islander. Y'all are the Out Islanders. Like, you come to our island. I say, Lord, let me not get gang in Freeport.
perception is reality, fam. Perception is reality.
Oh, I love that Mallory saying, or we can move to Mount Alberni. The
But
Great
for
Como
real,
Hill.
for
Oh,
real,
goodness.
and you think about it. For example, you had Princess Cruise Lines was coming through, and they were gonna visit Cat Island, and a lot of the questions were about, if you're gonna come, are you gonna bring enough trash bins? You gonna come here and you're gonna make a bathroom for these people on the beach?
Wow,
Are you
that's
going
true.
to, and what happens when you have Exuma, for example? You remember when Exuma started developing, and then crime rates rose in Exuma, and all of the things that follow this development. I forget which development it was,
Hmm.
but there's these things that happen along with development, and we've seen it happen so many
Like
times.
societal things. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, you
I mean,
have
look
to
at
be aware.
NASA. We're so developed. I feel like like you're saying, there's a direct correlation between being developed and very congested and crime. Like, direct correlation. There has to be, I'm sure there might be some studies out there, but there definitely is. Like, when there's too much buildings, too many people crammed in one place, not enough opportunity for everyone, not enough equal opportunity. Why you do that face?
Because
You
I'm
can
gonna
walk this
come,
soapbox.
I'm gonna
This is
be a
your
devil's
show.
advocate on that one real quick.
Go, Bradley. That's your show.
No, if you ready, I wanted you to finish.
I
I'm just
done.
saying.
I down. I'm off the soapbox.
I mean, because when you think about that, right? You think about this whole sustainable development thing. But meanwhile, my goal is to live, on some island, and have as few neighbors as possible, and
Hmm.
um, just be free, right? But that's not good for the environment. Why would I go out there and defile a pristine piece of land and put a house there when I could easily go and rent an apartment somewhere in an urban setting where I don't have to expend any new carbon for me to clear this land or build this home. I'm not going to be interfering with any of the wildlife in the area. I'm not going to be adding any new trash or any new pollutants to the air. One of the arguments about sustainability is that the most sustainable thing for us to do is to put all humans in a city, in one big city, and have all of so then we have all of our pollution in one place, and you take advantage of economies of scale in treating that waste. And you for example, imagine a schoolhouse that has 30 students and a schoolhouse that has 100 students. The one with 30 students still needs to have electricity.
Electricity,
It still needs to
water.
have a wall out front. It still needs to have a teacher and a principal and a janitress or a janitor, or you need to have you have all these different things that are needed.
Security. Yeah.
But why not just ship everybody to one boarding school in the middle of town and have all of these things streamlined, have the big farm for the school right there, so you don't have to do, you have this whole green ethos going on, and then you limit your waste of energy, etc. But now you're sacrificing culture, because there's nothing like going to an out island. And I remember being in Gregory Town, and the kids running home from school for lunch, because and it's like, you are you going to sacrifice having these children grow up in
Well,
their
you
home
clearly want to.
experience? So, but it's less sustainable to have a school in every settlement than it is to have all this, everybody in one place, when you think about it. So,
That's an interesting topic, and I feel like that's worth its whole own episode, right? Like just sustainable development, pros and cons. I could get you back for that one.
yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully,
But just shift you.
yeah, it definitely hurts to think about sustainable development sometimes. So, like, you have to give up things that you love sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Because we are coming up on an hour already. I always feel like your episodes are never long enough. But we can still just start shifting gears. Would you have any sort of like advice for viewers who are watching or who are listening later on ways that they can probably, in their own way, be a part of the movement, maybe lessen their carbon footprint, and maybe even start considering ways to get involved in the blue economy? Are there resources out there? Can they get in touch with you about it? I know you are our climate change ambassador to the Bahamas right now. Yeah, I didn't want to say it earlier, but please know that Bradley is the climate change ambassador for the Bahamas. So if you do have inquiries about things, his email is up there. You can also check him out on Instagram. He also has like a photo Instagram. He takes really great photos, so do that too. But yeah, do you have any advice for our viewers on any of those various topics that I just threw out at you?
Thank you for reminding me to talk about the Climate Ambassador program. It was a real honor. You know, um, all credit to Director Newbold and Prime Minister Davis. And then I could name all the people, because if we think about this, the reason I'm a climate ambassador is to add numbers to the army. Basically, you know, the goal is for us to have as many people in the Bahamas considering these things and looking for the next thing to do.
Yeah.
Just as a rewind, at COP, I remember at lunch, I sat down and I looked for people who looked like me, right? So I sit down and I see this lady who, she looked a little bit like my grandmother. And I'm like, okay, I'll sit here. And then next to her is this lady in her 40s, afro out, like all about business. Then another lady, and the lady looked like my grandma, afro as well. And then with them was a younger woman, maybe 19, 20, a black. And then they had a person, I think she looked like she was Latino descent, right? I sit down, and all of them from Barbados. One is the Minister of Finance from Barbados. One is the climate ambassador, and one
Eh,
is one of the youth delegates. And the way that they were working at that conference, there was no time for me to ask them a bunch of questions. I remember,
wow.
like, one snippet was that, I think her name is Marsha Cattle. She said, our goal is to get some of these infrastructure investments off of the government budget, right? And she was trying to find ways to do that, and that was why she was at COP.
Wow.
This is what we need. This is what we need: empowered people who are professionals, who found what they like to do and are applying it to the present question. So, something that I do anytime I have something new coming across me is I just go online on like YouTube or on SoundCloud, and I search.
University of YouTube.
I like, exactly. I go climate change and human resources, climate change and finance, climate change and gender equality. And you literally, if you want to figure out how to get involved in something, or figure out what's the state of the industry in your industry as it relates to climate change. You talk about climate change and health. You
Mm-hmm.
just go out there and you get to the information that's out there, because there's another quote, is the future is intersectional, right? Intersectionality is when you have one of the big things was like intersection of racism and gender rights, or the intersection of sustainable development and environmentalism, for example, right? So everything is intersectional. climate change and finance. It's all about, where do we come against each other? We are all professionals. We have our silos, but we all have to interact, and that's what the economy is about. The economy is about interactions, right? So
Right.
the future is intersectional. It's all about where do we meet each other and how do we work together. Um,
Hmm.
how do yeah? Trying to
I
remember
like
the
that.
rest of your questions. I don't know if you want to say something.
Oh, yeah. So we actually do have one more question in the audience. We'll see if you can answer it from Ria Fitzwilliam on YouTube. Do you know which houseplant should I get that is better for the air? I know I've seen posts like this before. I'm not sure if you know some off the top of your head that are good to keep inside your house.
This is a TED talk that I saw long ago about this guy in India. They were talking about how to sustainably manage air quality in large office buildings, and they had identified, I think, three plants that were, because it's also, you want to have a plant that's easy to maintain the air, but you have to trade-offs, right? This plant also has to just be easy to maintain. You want a
Mm-hmm,
plant that's going to live. And so they said mother's tongue was a good one, the one that comes up like that in your ornamentals. And if you Google it, you should be able to find it.
yeah, I was gonna say I'm a Google.
Yeah. And so I wouldn't say, I wouldn't be able to directly recommend too many plants, but I would say um, there is information out there. And this was Mother's Tongue was one of the ones they suggested, but that's an interesting question. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And so, as we wrap up this wonderful episode, I feel like I didn't get all of the information out of you that I wanted, but there's always next season. We can always bring you back again. Thank you for not cooking rice this time. But if you have just a
I
nice,
failed in
like,
other ways, don't worry.
cheese. But so I always like to ask my guests this season, I know a lot of times, depending on the type of work you do, you always have these like monumental or this significant life lessons from your particular day to day work or whatever you do. So, do you have a lesson learned that from your work or even your research or your time in school that you'd like to share with viewers? I know last time you said, do what you can now, and that's stuck with me since. Obviously, because I just remembered it.
Yeah, wow. And I
Nothing
wish
comes
I
to
had
mind
some
yet.
sort of, yeah, some big idea. But the one recent idea I had was oh man, yeah, we were sitting in this class, and just like you say, in sustainable development, you'll be like going down this road, being like, this is how we're going to save the world. And then you go, well, but what about, we installing all of these solar panels, but what about the people in China that have to make them? And what about the carbon emissions that they have to, release that we want to
Mhm.
blame them for? Or what about the work conditions? We getting this cheap solar panel, but did the person who made this solar panel have the chance to live a decent life? How do you
Wow.
feel about that? So it
It's kind of
says,
sad.
so the thing is, sitting with cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when you hold in this idea, but you live in a life that don't fit with that idea. Like I would love to be completely green, but anybody who turns on a light in the Bahamas, you turn on your fridge, you burn in fossil fuels, and you are part of the problem, right? Because that's how we make our electricity. You
Yeah.
you have all these instances where you're trying to move towards this goal, but you could see where you're not really meeting the mark. And in some instances, you can make yourself comfortable with where you are and say, okay, no, it's okay that I'm doing this. And, that's fine because, we have to do this. We have to live, blah, 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 blah. And you justify it. You get rid of the cognitive dissonance. You get rid of that little tension where you feel like what you're doing is somewhat wrong or you have to question what you're doing. But we have to have that tension. We have to live with the tension of wondering if what we're doing is right. And we have to always question what we do because the minute you start making yourself feel like what you do is okay every time and you stop really wondering like, am I doing the right thing here? The minute you stop doing that, you lose your power to find the right thing to do. So we have to learn to sit with these questions and feel comfortable having these questions, go into discussions knowing we're not going to find the answer every time. We're just trying to get somewhere better. We ain't get to the end.
It's all building upon what do they say, the shoulders of our ancestors or our forefathers.
Every
Definitely.
day.
But also just for people who might be like me, very much an overthinker, don't sit with it too long. To have some time to do something else, get outside in the environment and actually be grateful for the air quality that we have now. Our country is pretty good, I think, with our air quality compared to other ones. I know I have my brother that lives in a different country. I don't know if I should call the name, but even before we had to wear masks for COVID, there were some days and some weeks where they had to wear masks because the smog was just so bad. And he was just like, so wearing masks really ain't new for him. So be grateful, like take time and go outside and really appreciate what we have here in the Bahamas, appreciate our national resources, be an advocate for it too. I mean, Be inspired. Share the word, share the news, learn more about what you can do, small steps to a big change. And our last and final question for our lovely guest: who is someone in the sector, whether it's local or international, that inspires you and why? And don't say me. I don't count. I know I inspire you.
It's true. It's true. Um, all right, right now, you know who I'll say? Kelly Ashley Armstrong, because when
Yeah.
she went to Colombia and she was doing the climate work, and I was just like, what is climate work? Like, I measure plants. That's what I know.
Yeah.
I go outside and I measure, I pull up some soil and I look to see how much carbon is in it. You try to tell me that this woman is doing meteorology, and that seems so crazy. And she was one of the pioneers, I feel, in some of this work. Another individual would be Charles Hamilton,
Mm,
and he pioneers a lot of this adaptation as far as health. Right, it's one of the biggest questions we have in the Bahamas, and it's one of our going to be one of our bigger infrastructure expenses in the future. We
mm-hmm.
need to have purpose-built buildings that facilitate our adaptation to the changes we see in. And so, not only that, we need a purpose built workforce. We need to have skills within country to address these challenges. So, those two, um, I would say, when you have a pair that you look up to, those are pairs that I look up to. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, I actually, unfortunately, I've recently started hearing about Mr. Hamilton, so I definitely look forward to hearing more about him and maybe even getting him on the show as well. I've definitely had
More
Kelly
fun.
already. Such an inspiration, especially just being a female, right? First climate change professional, Bahamian. So inspirational. We have so many other amazing Bahamians doing amazing things. I got a finger. One
I got
more.
a last one. Then
Last
I'm
one.
gonna say Alicia Wallace, because
Ah,
the
tackling the
gender
big
the
one.
gender equality
Mm-hmm.
question and it's just generally equality. One of the sustainable development goals is to reduce inequalities between countries and individuals, right? Income inequalities set people up for challenges. They make it so that it's difficult for you to adapt to hurricanes. It's difficult for you to adapt to climate change or even COVID, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those income inequalities is sometimes the result of gender inequality. And those inequalities set people up to take advantage or to abuse the environment.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult for you to take care of your environment when you cannot take care of yourself. And so having people that represent these questions, these challenges that, you know, not only call out problems in our society, but also suggest solutions, I think is very important. So
I
that's
love
the
that.
last part I say, yeah.
Definitely. And I think just in the Bahamas, that is an issue that I think a lot of people are not aware of. And I probably got to get her on this show too, because I think it's a very important topic in the patriarchy. But I'll leave it there.
And I think we just got to say it until it's a normal thing to think about. Because over here, trust me, gender equality is, yeah,
What that
it's
is.
standard.
Yeah. So so we're gonna wrap it up for another episode. Thank you so much, Bradley, for being on the show again. I think you're definitely gonna be one of my regulars on this show. You always have so many amazing things to say. You definitely inspire me. So keep doing all the amazing things that you're doing. Do well in that masters. I know it gets rough, I know it gets lonely, but we all believe in you. You got this, and we're excited to have you come back home. Thank you to all my viewers who've been watching and riding this wave with us. Siren Sundays, season 5, episode 6. What more can I say? Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you all tune in next episode.
Appreciate you guys. Appreciate you, Lashanti. Please keep up the good work.